Welcome to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast, the official podcast of Ryan Johnson Ministries. This podcast was created for the purpose of equipping others for the advancement of the kingdom of God. We hope that you enjoy this episode and encourage you to subscribe to the Blacksmith Chronicles today. For more information about Ryan Johnson Ministries, please visit www.ryanjohnson.us or email us directly at info@ryanjohnson.us.
Hey guys, welcome to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast. This week, I have the honor and privilege to welcome a guest that is got a really powerful right now message, but also has the foundation, the background to be able to really bring a much needed truth to what we're going to be discussing in this podcast episode. It is a now word, but it's not a sermon. It's not, a preacher, a pastor, whatever, but it is a word that is now because of our generation and the things that we're facing. So without further ado, I just want to go ahead and dive into this and welcome this week's guest to the episode, Jeremy Adams. Thank you so much for joining the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast.
So excited to be here. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. We'll dive into a lot of this, but give us a little bit of a background of who Jeremy is.
Well, 45 years old. I probably shouldn't start off with the bad news, but 45 years old. You know what? Really, all I've ever been in my life as far as professionally is a teacher. Both of my parents were teachers. My family is teachers. I graduated from Bakersfield High School, which is Bakersfield's in the Central Valley of California. So think oil, think agriculture. We're kind of like the Texas of California. So everybody here feels like they're, the non-favorite child of California government. And so I've been, Bakersfield High School is at the southern part of the valley. And I graduated from Bakersfield High School in 1994. And to give you a sense of kind of how long I've been teaching and how deep my roots are to this school and this community, I started teaching there just 4 years later in 1998. I was a baby, 22 years old. And here we are, it's 2021. And I am now in my 24th year as a high school teacher. Met my wife at this high school. We went there together. Both of my daughters go there, or my daughter just went away to college. My other daughter is there. So, really education and teaching and kind of being in the life of young people. I've kind of made a career out of teaching high school seniors and college freshmen. I also teach at California State University, Bakersfield. So that kind of 17, 18, 19 age range where I teach social studies. I teach American civics and government and economics. That's essentially my professional background. And except for 4 years in Virginia at the wonderful Washington and Lee University, right there where Robert E. Lee is buried and everything. It's a magical 4 years I had in college. But except for that, I've been in the same town, in the same school most of my life. And so it really is kind of that glue of community that I go to every single day.
Well, the reason I love this and we're going to go in this is, of course, you were, California Teacher of the Year at one time. You have this background in history and civics. And for me personally, it is something I really want to dive into because I believe even with the past two elections, it's evident that so many in our nation have a lack of understanding of how civics work. They didn't pay attention in class, or they didn't pay attention in history class, or whatever the case may be. It's very, very evident. But then you fast forward to be beyond those two, and we're being hammered with critical race theory. We're being hammered with, open bathroom policies. And there's a lot of things that are facing our school systems, our children, from sex education, being in kindergarten levels all the way, on up. But it's what all these things combined together is initially what brought you together to write this book called Hallowed Out, and why it is really and genuinely a warning, not only to the next generation, but to us as well, as parents, as leaders in the body of Christ, or just, you're working in your community, your hometown, whatever the case may be. Why did you feel so much of an urgency to put this book together?
Well, quite simply because these changes that we're seeing are relatively recent. One of the things that, the book came out 3 weeks ago today. And so, I'm an ordinary person, I'm just a high school teacher. I'm not famous in any way, but it's kind of weird because I'm having this experience now, Ryan, where people are, kind of, they're mean, or they come after you on social media, or people who haven't read the book, will give it a nasty review. And I'm not used to like people coming at me, you know what I mean? Like I'm used to like, kids and family and friends. And it's kind of a different world for me, to kind of have negativity a little bit. And so what's interesting to me is the extent to which so many people are bothered by the fact that a lot of these distressing changes are recent. When you teach for 24 years, you do notice changes. You think to yourself, well, hold on, because I talk to my students a lot. I mean, that's one of the things that I love about the classroom is getting to know the kids. Is you get to know them, you talk to them, you talk about issues and events and how they spend their time and what their value system is. You talk about them and their worldview, and you start to realize, well, that's, they'll talk about little things and you'll say to yourself, well, that's weird, or well, that's distressing. Like for instance, obviously religion is a big part of this podcast. One of the things I've noticed in just the last 10 years is not just that they don't go to church. I mean, we all know that we all know that the rates of people who are affiliated with no religion have skyrocketed. We know but that's not interesting. What's interesting to me is that they don't know anything about religion. I mean, they literally are just ignorant about it. Yesterday, I was giving a lecture about ancient Athens, and St. Paul went to Athens one time and he gave one sermon. He didn't do too great there, but he gave one sermon. And I said, how many of you guys know who St. Paul is? And these are advanced kids. Maybe 5 kids out of 30 had any idea who St. Paul was. I mean, it's just the knowledge of religion. And it's not just Christianity. It could be any religion. They don't know anything about Buddhism. They don't know anything about Confucianism. And so that wasn't the case 15 or 20 years ago, and so people who don't like this message want to discount it by saying, this is just a typical old man. First of all, I'm not old. I'm only 45. So the people who are out there calling me old, look at me, I'm not that old. But, this is a typical old man, get off my lawn book. No, it's not. This is different. And I'll tell you, there are 2 big things that are different about these young people. And if you think that everything's all right, that this is just generational anxiety, people are wrong if they think that. Number one, our young people are miserable. They're the most unhappy Americans in history. And I'm not making this up. The research is very clear about this. If you look at the rates of suicide, they've gone up over 50% in the last 10 years. If you look at the rates of self-harm, they've gone up by over 60%. The word that we teachers hear all the time, anxiety, anxiety, anxiety. They're anxious. They're isolated. A lot of them don't have friends. They stare at screens all day. So this is new. I'm sorry. 15 years ago, you go to a football game on a Friday night and it's packed. Now, no problem getting a seat. So that is a new pivot in the culture. Whether or not people want to admit it or not, we adults have created a world where young people are not happy. And the book has all kinds of theories about why that is and evidence of why that is. But that's the big thing. And the second thing, of course, I kind of alluded to it, is they don't spend their time in the places where young people used to spend their time, right? They're not hanging out with friends. They're not dating. They're not going to football games. They're not meeting in person. It's this. It's 10, 12 hours a day scrolling in isolation in their rooms. And we can talk later about what it is they're looking at and how that affects their view of the country and religion and whatnot. But this is why I felt the urgency, is because sometimes teachers will see things a little bit earlier than everybody else. And I felt like saying, look, I'm waving the alarm bell, right? Everybody who's not a teacher, this is what we're seeing, folks. And we're not making it up and we're not being dramatic. And, we don't write a book to get famous, trust me, because that's not what happens. So you do it because you passionately believe in young people and you want to tell the older people, get on board here.
In our modern culture right now, one of the biggest things that is a driving force of this, of course, is wokeism, some kind of understanding of wokeism. But, you go into details a little bit about something that's hitting the educational system under a terminology of enlightened ideas. This, progressive fundamental thought process. We're not fully advancing this stuff. What exactly does that mean? These ideas that are quote unquote enlightened.
Well, I think that there's no question that as human beings, we kind of want to be part of the cool kids, right? We all want to be part of the group that is being elevated in society at one point or another, right? And there's no question that if you want to be kind of part of a subset of society that is considered to be enlightened, considered to be in the know. I mean, if you look at the quote unquote elite in society, you go to the coast, right? You don't go to the Central Valley of California. You don't go to Tennessee, right? You go to San Francisco, you go to Los Angeles, you go to New York, you go to DC, and you look around and ask, well, what do the cool kids think about all these things? And let me tell you something, the cool kids aren't loving America, right? They're not professing a love of Christ. Which again, you don't have to love this country. You don't have to be a Christian. That's fine. But there's no, my only point is that the kind of the elevated view, the view that people, if you want to be in the cool group, this is not a group that, kind of has traditional values and spends their time in ways that profess a love of community and country and things of this nature. So, I think that is, when I look at young people want to be accepted. And they're smart. They're smarter than you and I are when it comes to the social media. They see where the trend lines are, and they're getting on these trains very early. And the warning of my book is that these trend lines are not going to lead them to a happy life, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it is a very basic message, which is the same things that make human beings fulfilled and happy and joyful today are the things that made people happy, fulfilled, and joyful 500 or 1,000 years ago. Right? Friendship, family, faith, community, learning, a sense of purpose in your life. These are, human beings don't change that much just because we're born in this time period or because we live in a woke culture. And those things that fill us are going away in the life of young people. That's why I use the term hollowed out, is that they're not filled with the things that traditionally lead to human flourishing. And again, you don't have to have a celebratory view of America. You definitely don't have to be a person of faith. There are all kinds of things that you can fill your life with. My argument, my critique is that they're not filling it with anything other than themselves. That's what worries me the most.
And a lot of this, I know a lot of people are listening and they're going, okay, all this should be handled at the home. And I'm not going to disagree with that whatsoever. But you're shining a bigger light that this has infiltrated our education systems. We now have teachers in elementary, middle school, high school, and of course college that are pushing this form of maybe a form of socialism, a form of hatred, anti-patriotism towards the nation. There's this anger, there's this rage in the isolation of our young people. It's actually helping being fed through an education system that is helping keep people kind of isolated in that degree. How do we as parents recognize this, but more important than just beyond recognizing it, what are some of the things that we need to do to help from our end?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will say to you, and this is something that I feel like has not been talked about enough, is the fact that, when we look at the lives of the young people who come into our classrooms, the research is really clear that how a student performs at school and the value system that they're getting is still 90% from the home. That's where you're dead on correct. That teachers really only make, the research is pretty clear, only about 10% of the difference. Really, if you come into school and you have a value system that values education, you know how to be respectful, you know how to work hard, you know how to take notes, you know how to study, you have people at home who have told you that this is the door to the American dream, is working hard in school. If you come to school with that, then you're 90% of the way there. And so, your question is, well, what can we do? The problem is that so many of the young people who come to my school, is they come from homes where they're simply not connected to the kind of value system and relationships that only an adult can give to them. That's one of the things I really want people to understand, is this book is not a screed against young people. Young people can't control the world they're in, But what we have to realize is how much they are not around adults. And that was kind of I got distracted a few minutes ago. I said there were two big things about this generation. The first one was how unhappy they are. But the second thing is how unconnected to adults they are. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of my students live with a single parent. They're working 2 or 3 jobs. When they don't eat together, they don't go to church together, they don't spend that much time together. And who are young people talking to all day? They're talking to one another on social media platforms. And young people are going to get their value system from somewhere. And what's happening is they're absorbing this value system from their phones, their devices, other kids all day. And of course, the pandemic has accelerated and amplified this. It used to be, and I'll get to your question here about schooling now. What really bothers me the most is the attitude used to be, okay, maybe at home you're not getting a meal, so we'll do it at school, which I'm happy to do. I think that's fine that we do that. Maybe you are having emotional issues at home and you need counseling at school. I'm happy to do that too. Even, clothing. I mean, there are all kinds of things that schools do now. They're called wraparound services. But what bothers me is when it comes to things like a value system of respect and hard work and diligence, that now we seem to have this attitude that says, well, young people, if they use profanity at home, we have to expect them to use it at school. Therefore, you can't really in any way punish. You really can't do much about it. You have to understand that that's just going to be part of the classroom. That if a teacher gets told off or yelled at, you really shouldn't suspend them because you're just kicking that kid out of the classroom and hurting them in the long run. So, they bring a value system to school. And instead of trying to improve that value system and say, maybe you're not getting the right form of expectation at home, we're going to do it at school. Now we're just simply supposed to understand our students instead of understand and then say, because we understand, we think you can have these high expectations. And so it's a really hard nut to crack because 90% of their success comes from home. And even when they do come from home, we teachers are now expected to be much more therapeutic in our treatment of them. I mean, teachers nowadays, let me tell you, I'm not just teaching, I'm parenting, I'm counseling, I'm being a friend. I'm supposed to do all of this stuff now. And it makes it harder to actually worry about academics. So there was a lot there to unpack because that was a great question. I know that's not a particularly helpful, or I should say hopeful response, because at the end of the day, teachers can't be responsible for all of the failings of society. We can't.
It really gives an interesting insight because you talk about the relationship, the connecting that young people can get they should get from parents. But I understand there's broken homes, there's broken situations, there's broken systems. And I understand that. And so it kind of makes some things jump out of my attention. For example, if you're not getting that relationship from a home front, you have a teacher who is very pro CRT, pro socialism, pro anger towards the nation, and then they show any attention towards that individual, that young person, of course they gravitate to it. And it's the same thing with social media. The algorithm eventually connects, and that's all the information that you begin to see. So you find people that look like you, think like you, act like you, and function like you in every form. So that's really interesting for me to be able to hear that because it is I guess it is always the finger pointing. The school system's broke, education's broke, but ultimately it still comes back to us as parents. If we're going to turn this, we really have to turn up what we're doing in our own homes in that process, which is just fascinating. But then again, you brought up the COVID, and here we are again, where I'm from. Our kids are in school, but where I'm originally from, there's some schools that have been shutting down. They went back to online, and many other places didn't even start school. They just directly went online and stuff. And I know there's some principal things as far as the relationship side, what online school is actually causing, but is there something else that the pandemic has not necessarily enlightened, but enlarged in how it is affecting this generation?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are quite a few things. I think the first thing, and let me just say, I mean, I'm not a virologist. I'm not an epidemiologist. I read a ton on this stuff, and because I read so much, my opinions are changing sometimes. So I'm definitely not an expert on that kind of thing. But I will tell you, it's very clear that there are going to be some long-lasting effects. I think the first one, just kind of not just about the kids, but as a society, I do think that we've kind of lost any capacity for risk assessment. To be able to say, here is the real danger of something, and here is how our society should respond to this level of danger, because you're never going to be completely safe. And the thing that worries me about our kids, then, how does that dovetail into our kids, is we already have a generation that is unengaged with the world, right? I mean, if you just look at the human body, our faces, our knees we're made to move, right? Our arms are connected so that we can fight or hug somebody else, right? We are literally evolved and created for connection and movement. And those are the things that they were told, don't do for a year and a half. Don't move, stay where you are. Don't connect to anybody. It's dangerous. And I'm not saying it wasn't for a while. I'm not, in no way am I criticizing that policy, because there was a time and place for it. But let us just not pretend, though, that that's not going to have serious consequences, that it hasn't had serious consequences. And the real problem with and it's a great question, in the long run is people forget how to go out and connect to other people. I've noticed that my students, they don't make eye contact, right? They don't know how to hold a conversation as well. There's a kind of malaise, a kind of deadening of the spirit. I call them Zoombies, because they've become zombies on Zoom calls all day for a year and a half. And I've noticed that they're less likely to get involved in class. They seem, I was looking at some early studies that they're going back to school, but they're not signing up for sports like they used to. They're not signing up for drama classes like they used to. So you ask about the kind of pandemic and the long run consequences. It's really amplified the disconnect between the kids and all the activities and the people and the relationships that they used to be a part of. And like I said, it's also, I mean, you and I know you find meaning in life by climbing a mountain, by falling in love, by getting on your knees and praying. By reading a book that changes your world. I mean, these are the things that really matter in your life. And I'm afraid that we're raising a generation of people that have never experienced it. And if they have, they've forgotten how to go back and do it again. Does that make any sense at all?
It does. And it's one of those things that I often say, we live in an age of communication, but no one knows how to have a dialogue anymore. No one knows how to have a conversation. And it's kind of perplexing at times, and it's opened up so many things of where we're at. I'm 43 years old, and I'm a son of an American veteran who served in the United States Air Force. And, I grew up in small town, Northeast Alabama, which for those that are listening, of course, you do get that Southern accent. It's not fake, it's real. And for Jeremy's California friends and stuff and everything, I'm really Southern, but nevertheless, there's so many things that are happening. Like right now at 43, I do remember a lot of President Reagan. Of course, I remember a lot of him. I remember every president after that. I was at home sick one year and saw the Challenger explode on national television, live TV. I wept like a baby at the funeral of former President Ronald Reagan. I remember Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall. There's so many things that are very pivotal in my life. And I know our nation has made beyond its fair share of mistakes. We have never done everything correctly. But I also believe that we're a nation that is formed in a way to where we can fix what is wrong. The government is set up. I'm a constitutionalist. I love the Constitution of the United States of America. I believe it is a phenomenal piece of governmental document that allows us to correct what has been done wrong, whether to man, to a region, community, whatever the case may be. But in saying that, I look around and I'm beyond words at the rising cry for people who admire and love socialism. And I can't wrap my mind around it. There's a lot of me that says we now have a generation before us that do not understand the difference between freedom and liberty. People say, we're the land of the free, which we are, but liberty has such an important context to who we are, what we are, and how we form and how we function. I'm saying all that to say, you fast forward the same ones plus more that maybe not pro-socialist, but they've become very anti-patriotic. It's almost the wokeism connection to this is, you don't need to love this nation because this nation's a nation of flaws. You don't need to say, God bless America. You don't need to do that. It's like this, there's a connection of the two. Now they stand separate. I don't deny that whatsoever, because there are individuals that they're very pro-capitalism, but they've turned against the nation. But in most cases, there's this pairing of socialism and our nation, or anti-America, anti-patriotism, whatever you want to call it. Why are we seeing this just grow and grow within this generation? Because I'm having a very difficult time wrapping my mind around it. I'm not a genius by any stretch of the imagination, but I did say at a Holiday Inn Express one time, so I do have some kind of understanding. But socialism has never worked, ever. It's not like there's a possibility of it work. We have evidence that it's never worked. And then why hate the nation that has given us so much? I don't understand it. Help me to understand what's happening.
First of all, let me just say that I feel like I'm looking into like a similar mind, because like we're almost the same age. And so I'm noticing like the way that you're talking and the way that you're feeling is exactly how I feel. Because typically, I'm dealing with a bunch of people in their mid-30s or people in their 50s, but very rarely am I dealing with somebody who's pretty much my age, you and me. So you're talking about all these memories. I'll tell you a funny story. I used to, like, when Reagan, was done in 1989, I remember thinking, what's going on? I just thought that was his job. My dad, my dad was a teacher. My brother worked at Domino's Pizza. Reagan's the president. I don't understand this. What's going on? And I think that what happens is, you and I thought you were going to mention 9/11. I was a young man on 9/11, and while I remember the Challenger, I do remember it being more kind of a sense of deflating our aspirations more than being, kind of this real challenge to the country. It's like, well, we're aspiring for this, we didn't get there. That's different than saying, your way of life is under attack. You know what I mean? And so these are kind of these pivotal kind of totems in my life and yours. And so your frustration, I think it's just refreshing to hear somebody else my age feel the same way, because I think people who are our age will look at some of these attitudes that you're describing so well, and you'll say, like, that wasn't even like, it was so thoroughly known by our generation that socialism doesn't work, that communism is synonymous with degradation and human dignity and human rights and the freedom of every individual. Why would you even flirt with that? It blows the mind of somebody our age. Here's another one, and I know you're going to know what I'm talking about. Or I don't know. If you're not around young people, you might not. But like, here's something that never occurred to me. When I was growing up, and I walked by a big house in my neighborhood, or I saw somebody drive by in a BMW, I thought to myself, I hope that I'm successful someday. I hope that I make choices someday so that I can be successful like that. It never occurred to me that somehow that person owes me their house, or they owe me their car, or that somehow they've manipulated things and that they've cheated and lied or whatever, or cajoled their way to success because the system is just obviously geared for them and it's obviously against me. It never occurred to me that I was a kind of a pawn in this kind of larger power scheme of history, and that I didn't have any agency. I mean, these things that you and I are talking about, I'm sure it never occurred to you that you didn't have control over your life. And I think that part of it is we grew up in the middle of the Cold War, right? We understood what we were fighting. We understood what was on the other side of that wall. We were only 40 years removed from the heroes who stormed the beaches of Normandy and Omaha. We lived with those stories. When you venerate a country, you absorb what's extraordinary about that country. And you learn about what's unique about Washington and Jefferson and Hamilton and Madison and John Jay and Benjamin Franklin. And you realize that what they did was not just rare in history, it had never been done. If you look at the back of the $1 bill, in Latin, it says Novius Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages. We had never done what the American founders did. So I think that what happens is when you whatever era you grow up in is kind of your baseline. Like you think that that's normal. So for you and me, having this kind of aspirational view, understanding the evils of socialism and communism, having respect for religion, and just kind of growing up where most people went to church, and if they didn't, at least they knew about it. That was our sense of normal. So what you're kind of describing is the genesis of the book, because all of a sudden kids start, what's interesting is I'll notice something in my classroom. The kids will say something and they're starting to say it over and over again. And I think, this is weird. Is it just my students? And then you'll talk to another teacher and they're like, no, we're hearing the same thing. And so then you do the research when you write a book and you realize this is a national thing. So, I'm going to disturb you right now, but just kind of confirms what you're saying. There was a poll a few years ago where socialism ranked higher than capitalism among 18 to 29-year-olds. There was another poll where 1 out of 5 millennials see the American flag as a symbol of hatred. So let me try and explain this to you, because I think it's important that your listeners try and understand where the kids are coming from. Now, again, I think we can tell by my tone of voice, I'm not down with what they're saying. I don't agree, but let me defend it for a minute. Let me explain it. So their view is this. Their view, let's start off with socialism. They're not sitting around at night reading Das Kapital under their covers with a flashlight, okay? They are not, reading about this. They're not trying to mimic a Maoist revolution or what Lenin did in 1917. They are a generation of Bernie Sanders. And what happened was somewhere along the way, Ryan, young people came up with this idea that what makes a country great is not how people use their freedom, not how they utilize their God-given individual liberty and what they do with it. No. The real measure of a society is how many services we provide to people. And then if there are not enough services, then somehow it's an unjust country. Whereas you and I would say, what makes a country unjust is limiting people's God-given freedom. That's real injustice. And there's that generational divide there because they never grew up with an existential threat to the United States. Islamic terrorism was never going to destroy America. We all know it was never going to destroy America. It was going to kill people. It was going to be a danger. It was going to be a pain in the butt. Might lead to some wars. But the clerical barbarism of Al-Qaeda was never a real alternative to our way of life. Whereas you and I grew up in a world where there was an alternative and it was scary. And we looked at the Eastern Bloc. We see what socialism looks like. And we know that that nobody was climbing over the Berlin Wall to get over there. It was one-way traffic, baby. One-way traffic. That's why I don't understand young people who want to go the other direction. But that's not how they see it. They see socialism in kind of this optimistic, we've never done it the right way. Look at the income inequality in America. Look at the lack of social mobility. Look at the fact that, and I understand where they're coming from. There are a lot, corporations not paying a lot of money, billionaires who pay 0%. I understand the frustration. I understand why they would get angry and say, well, the whole system has got to be junked. Now, the other thing, I know I've gone on for a while and I'll be quiet, but the other thing, why do they dislike the country? I don't think that they dislike the country, but I do think that they believe that we can't go forward in the country unless we really absorb all the bad things that have happened in it. Now, what I want to say to young people is, you think that middle-aged people in America don't know our history? You think we don't know about slavery? You think we don't know about Jim Crow? You think we don't know about the KKK? We know about all these things. But I think their view is, if you don't understand that there's a link between a really problematic past and inequality today, which I think that there probably is, there's no question about it actually, then we're not going to be able to go forward. That's why they focus on the bad, because they think that it will lead to kind of a better outcome in the future. I doubt that, but let me defend that. That's kind of where they're coming from. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but that's where they're coming from.
It does. I still struggle wrapping my mind around it, because I can simplify that and say, if you go to a restaurant, they're going to serve you food, but you still have to pay for it. You still have to pay for that food. You just because you show up at the restaurant doesn't mean the restaurant should serve you anything without there being some form of cost, because there's a cost unto them. I'm just, part of the confusion in all this for me is, if a younger generation could recognize that the most outspoken voices of socialism are some of the most wealthiest individuals because of capitalism. And I use Bernie Sanders, AOC, all those individuals who are very much pro-socialism. I'm thinking, you are a gazillionaire and you've made your living because of this. And it's just, it's one of those things that I struggle with. I think back, and of course, 9/11, without a doubt, I look at 9/11 and go, how are we not in a better shape because of, 9/12, where we were as a country as 9/12 and stuff. And I remember realizing what was happening and going, oh my gosh, we're under attack. I mentioned the Challenger because at a young age, it was the kind of the reality of, oh, wow, we don't do everything right. Here we are in the space race, and we're supposed to be the greatest, best in the world. And this thing implodes, and it's just kind of at a young age, a wake up call that in the ideology of the nation going every right direction, we can easily make flaws. We can easily make mistakes, but you learn, you correct, and so on and so forth in that. So there's so much. And I know that this is genuinely a warning for America. It's a warning for America. It's a warning for the next generation. These things are infiltrating our education system, our homes, our phones, social media, all these things. But I do want to say, I do want to ask this: what is the generation getting right? What are they doing right in this process? Because I don't want to walk away from this, our time together, and going, okay, wrong, 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 wrong. I want to also know, what are they doing right now?
Yeah, great question. And I do just want to emphasize that, the book is not just a screed against young people. It really is. If it's critical of you and me. It really is critical of the adults who have stepped back from their space, their intellectual, moral, and physical space, and allowed social media and allowed, kind of the darker elements of culture to fill the gap. And again, young people are going to get a value system from somewhere. This idea that anybody's value free is silly. No, you have values, right? You have a worldview. Now, it might not be a good one, and I think a lot of them are absorbing a really toxic worldview. But that's not their fault. That's you and me. That's the broader culture, the lack of adulthood. But your question of what are they getting right? It is a dynamic generation. They are still a very dynamic generation, and there are two things I would say about them that I really admire. Now, both of these things still mystify me a little bit, but last summer when they're tearing down statues and monuments and things like that, it does drive me up the wall. And so I don't want anybody out there listening to this to think that I'm defending this. I'm not. But the people who showed up a few hours before that at these protests, who do feel like there is a gap in the way that minorities are treated in this country, that idea that we should be outraged if there is unequal justice, that is an American idea. I mean, that's what I want to say to the young people who dislike the country is I want to say, look, your value system is completely American. When you tell me what you believe is justice with a capital J, you're preaching the Declaration of Independence to me. Mm-hmm. You're preaching the 14th Amendment. You're preaching Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. Your view of justice is completely American, folks. I have my oldest daughter who went away to college. We fight quite a bit about politics. And actually, we've just stopped talking about politics because I don't want to fight with her anymore. But I always want to say to her, sweetie, where are you getting your ideas about what's right and wrong in politics? And at the end of the day, you're getting them from American views, American sources. So there's this interesting duality where it's the least patriotic generation in American history who are the most likely, when they articulate their views, to have a thoroughly American view of the world, right? So it's a weird duality there. And so I do think that they got that right. When they're out marching, they are marching for American ideals. They are marching for Lady Justice to be blind, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is I do appreciate their ambition. And I know probably a lot of people disagree with me on this. I do think that the climate is a problem. I do think that the environment is a problem. I don't think we should be abolishing oil anytime soon because I live in oil town, right? The mascot of my high school is the Drillers. I do think that there's a good way to go about doing this. But what I admire about it is that it is a global problem and they're not scared and they're willing to sacrifice. They will say, if I can't eat meat, then I'm not going to eat meat. If I need to buy expensive groceries to make sure that there's less transportation costs, then they're willing to do that. So I do like their ambition. I do like their idea that, we can solve big problems and we can sacrifice to do it. I do admire that in a lot of ways. And let me just say, most of my former students and current students are great people. I love being around them. I like talking to them. One of the things that I do worry about is I don't want any of my former students to think that this is a knock on them. Most of them are very kind, very, very personable. But in the last 5 to 10 years, I have noticed a lot of these issues going on in their lives that worry me, hence the book.
It really is. The good thing about being a warning is we can be alerted to what is happening and we can help to be a solution and not just another cog in the problem wheel in that. So how can people learn more about you, learn how to get the book and all that stuff?
Oh, thank you. So obviously, the book is called Hollowed Out, A Warning About America's Next Generation. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at barnesandnoble.com. My understanding is it's available in most bookstores in the country. The book is actually starting to do very well. But the thing I would say about it is a word of mouth book. Again, I'm not a famous person. So, I really need people who read it and like it to recommend it to 2 or 3 people. It is a message book. It is a look. If we don't get on top of this very soon, we really are going to lose a generation in their private lives. They won't be able to be joyful and happy and meaningful. And in our civic life, they will not be able to renew the blessings of this country. And so we've got to get on board. So you can follow me on Twitter, Jeremy Adams 6, even though I'm learning that it's a very mean place. A very mean place. I had no idea people were so randomly mean. You can follow me on Instagram, Jeremy S. Adams 1976. And so, and I don't tweet and post a bunch of silly stuff all that often. It's always about the book or about an article I've written. But at any rate, thank you so much for having me on. This was one of my favorite conversations I've had, for sure.
I really appreciate it. Of course, this is a subject that I really enjoy amongst any things. And you talking about mean people. My first reaction is welcome to ministry, because I know it from the side of ministry. You're whatever you post with the best of intentions, you're going to have some that like it, many that hate it, and those that just absolutely fail to understand what you said in the beginning.
That last part there is the gospel. It's so interesting, people who will, post these mean things or write a negative review, and you can tell they didn't read the book. No, you can tell that, they feel like it's a more conservative message and therefore we have to slam it. It's like, in many instances, what you're criticizing, I said the exact opposite, in the book, and so, I'm 45 years old and I knew this was going to be a fascinating journey, but I will take every arrow in the world if it helps to get the message out there, because I'm more than happy to do so if it's going to help our children and our country in the long run. And I really do believe it will.
I would encourage everybody to check it out, get their copy of Hollowed Out. When you get it, when you read it, make sure to go back where you purchase it and leave a rating and review. That also just helps garner that information and get that out there as well. Make sure you connect with Jeremy on his social media accounts. And I just really, again, thank you so much for being a part of this.
This was great fun. Thank you so much. Best of luck to you.
Awesome. And everybody else, until the next episode, guys, we love you and we bless you in the name of Jesus.
Thank you for listening to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast. It is our prayer that this episode challenged you, encouraged you, and equipped you for the advancement of the kingdom of God. For more episodes or ways that you can partner with Ryan Johnson Ministries, please go to www.ryanjohnson.us or email us directly at info@ryanjohnson.us. Please join us again soon for another episode of the Blacksmith Chronicles.